Hi, now let's look at monetary policy, all the previous questions from 95. So, there are roughly around some 28 to 29 questions excluding the fact-oriented questions. So, I divided this into two parts to ensure that the video would not be very lengthy and it would be comfortable for you to go through those questions. So, the first and foremost question, the money multiplier in an economy increases with which one of the following? In fact, this happens to be repeated almost 2-3 times in the in UPSC. Money multiplier. So, in the description I would also provide you the video explaining how money gets multiplied and the importance of reserve ratios. You know the fact, my friends, a reserve money or a high powered money, that is M0, printed and circulated by RBI, gets multiplied at a multiplier rate, and that is by 1 by RR. So RR stands for reserve ratio. Reserve ratio. So since you might have observed that, this corresponds to the total money supply. The total money supply is equal to M0, that is what we call reserve money or high powered money. And 1 by RR is what we call as a money multiplier. Money multiplier. So I think you might have recognized the fact that money multiplier is indirectly proportional to the reserve ratio. Higher is the reserve ratio, lesser will be the money multiplier, and lesser is the reserve ratio, more will be the money multiplier. So the money multiplier in the economy increases with which one of the following? That is, it increases with the decrease in the reserve ratio, isn't it? But increase in cash reserve ratio, no, it's not wrong. It should decrease. Increase in SLR, no, it's not wrong. Increase in banking habit of the people, and the last one, increase in population of the country. So this has nothing to do with it. Increase in banking habit of the people. How come? Because let's say if Mr. X happens to deposit certain amount of money in a bank, some percentage of deposits is what the bank maintains as a reserves, isn't it? So you know the fact that not all 100% of the money that X deposits is what bank could lend. Every bank across the globe, you know this fact that they happen to maintain certain amount of reserves to meet their requirements, and that proportion of reserves determines the money multiplier. So only when the banking habits of people increases, isn't it? So there would be a high tendency for money to get multiplied, and henceforth in this question this is the most appropriate answer. And imagine if they have given you decrease in CRR, then in fact then this would have been the better answer. Okay, so that would be the. In India, central banks function as a lender of last resort, usually referred to which of the following? So if you look at the various functions that RBI performs other than formulating monetary policy, reviewing it and revising it once in a while, it also acts as a banker to the bankers. So when I say lender of last resort does mean, my dear friends, what do you think is the major source of money to a bank? Mostly in the form of deposits. Large source of funding for the bank comes from the deposits. Of course, the owners of the bank would invest certain amount of money, but major source of money to the banks happens from the deposits. And banks could also borrow from the fellow banks by simply going for call money market, or simply they could raise money by selling certificates of deposits. These are what we call money market instruments. But in case if the bank was not able to raise funds or raise enough money to meet its requirements, in such case there is one last option that every bank in India could exercise, that is borrow money from their banker, none other than RBI. And henceforth in this context we happen to end up simply saying RBI acts as a lender of last resort to the bankers. So now let's look at the options. Lending to trade and industry bodies when they fail to borrow from other sources, no, RBI doesn't guarantee that in case they fail in the markets, RBI doesn't guarantee that I am with you, no. It's left to the respective people. Providing liquidity to the banks having a temporary crisis, yes. Lending money governments to finance budget deficits, no, even this is doesn't RBI doesn't guarantee, though RBI acts as a banker to the governments, but RBI never guarantees to the government that in case if you're not able to raise funds from abroad or any other part of the country, then we are not going to be the last resort. This is the promise that RBI never does it. So henceforth the most appropriate option happens to be the B. Consider the following statements. The governor of Reserve Bank of India is appointed by the central government. Yes, we don't have any anything that the constitution says. I think none of you, when you have gone through the polity, you might never have come across appointments and simply the emoluments, perks with respect to RBI governor. So it's completely discretion of the government of India, and not necessarily has to be part of government or a formal civil servant. Anyone could be appointed. Certain provisions in the Constitution of India gives the central government the right to issue directions to the RBI in public interest. So my dear friends, let's look at the government has every right. Of course there are certain instances where the government also gives certain directions to the RBI in the public interest, yes, but the same thing is nowhere mentioned in the Constitution of India. So since there is a word, this particular Constitution of India has been included as part of the sentence, does make this sentence not appropriate. The reason is the government of India do has certain rights to issue directions. Okay, so if you want to just look at it in the recent case, I mean, when Arun Jaitley was the finance minister, late Arun Jaitley was finance minister, he happened to make some recommendations, and with the interest with respect to the public interest, he made some recommendations. Of course those has become some controversial because the finance minister is trying to influence the monetary authorities, that is none other than RBI. But he has every right to in the public interest. He could simply make some suggestions and also recommendations, but this is something that you don't find any trace in the Constitution of India. Henceforth this is not the right statement. The RBI, the governor of RBI draws his power from RBI Act. Yes, absolutely right, and 1 and 3 happens to be the most appropriate answers. In fact the RBI Act of 1935 is what basically speaks a lot about, I mean, everything with respect to RBI. And the other important act is what you need to go through, the Banking Regulation Act of 1949. So these are the two most important acts that is in the context of banking and RBI Act. So henceforth I suggest you to make just go through them. Which among the following steps is most likely to be taken at the time of economic recession? Recession does mean an economy experiencing negative growth or fall in production for a certain period of time. Ideally, if you look at the textbook definition, for 2 consecutive or successive quarters. So it has been a contraction in economic activity results in recession, and that is contraction sustains for a longer span of time, and the impact is much severe. We use a term called depression. So when economy is contracting, that's it's in recession. What is the best thing to help the economy recover? Simply boost the consumption. How come? Boosting consumption would boost boosting demand, and that demand would result in a revival of an economy, isn't it? So all that you need to do is stimulate the economy. So what could be the things that would stimulate the economy? Cutting tax rates accompanied by increase in interest rate. No. So this is a fiscal stimulus, because fiscal authorities could do this, but increase in interest rate is something the monetary authorities could do. But look at it, you are reducing taxes results in demand, because the price of goods and services in the market increases, but you increasing interest rates makes the credit costly and credit supply decreases, thereby aggregate demand reduces. So henceforth this might help, but this is going to be against it. Increase in expenditure of public projects. Yes, this seems to be playing a better role. Increase in tax rates accompanied by reduction of taxes. So you are doing exactly opposite to what you are doing in the first case. So this might help in overcoming the problem of recession, but this results in reducing the consumption. So this is not the right option. Reduction of expenditure of public projects. No, you should spend more at times of recession, because every penny government invests or every penny government spends gets multiplied. And if you want to know how that gets multiplied, just go look at the video, investment income multiplier or money multiplier. That gives you a better idea, and I would add it in the description. Money multiplier or investment income multiplier, how an investment of some X rupees of government of India would gets multiplied and generates some more income, which is a multiple of the investment made by the government. Let's go to the next. With reference to urban cooperative banks in India, consider the following statements. I remember this is very previous question, I guess in 2021 itself. The reason is simple, my dear friends. Most of you regularly following newspaper might be aware of the fact there is a issue related to the cooperative bank in Maharashtra. So it is because of this particular cooperative banks being in use, there has been a question asked. I mean to say, the UPSC doesn't arbitrarily pick up some questions or arbitrarily pick up some topics, and by this time you realize the fact most of the questions related to economy is only based upon your understanding of the concepts. But agar there is a question based upon something, here in this case you need certain understanding of what is a cooperative bank and how are they regulated, and how are they, I mean, what exactly meaning, what is the purpose kya hai. But why do you think such questions are asked occasionally? Because they happen to have, I mean, they have been in use for a certain period of time, because the scam itself is worth approximately some 10,000 crore rupees of money, and iske liye everyone is speaking about it. So henceforth you could look at the answer. They are supervised and regulated by local boards set up by the state governments. of course you have cooperative societies. Okay, most of you are aware of it, something called DCCB and all these things. They can issue equity shares and preference shares. Okay, so let's look at it. This is something, okay, equity shares and preference shares like any other entity. They were brought under the purview of banking regulation 1940 through an amendment, okay, in 1996. Okay, so if you look at, my friends, it is because of this particular banks under crisis. Basically they used to be the cooperative society, whichever happens to be elected by the respective members, are the one who really manages it. But in the recent times, because of all these things happening, the government happened to bring in under the purview so that the RBI could regulate in these particular institutions. So what seems to be the most appropriate answer? They are supervised and regulated by the local bodies set up by the state governments, and they can issue equity shares and preference shares. So the third option happens to, the last one happens to be appropriate. If the RBI decides to adopt an expansionist monetary policy, which of the following would it not do? Expansionist monetary policy does mean increase in supply of money. So for what reason the RBI tends to increase in money supply? To reduce the interest rates. Why so? It results in increase in credit supply, because that results in boosting demand. So what would be the things that RBI doesn't do if its intention is to go for expansion of a monetary policy? Cut and optimize SLR. Okay, we can keep it in mind first. If RBI decides to adopt an expansion policy, which of the following would it not do? So most of you might neglect this word not, and that really throws you in a trap. So it would not do. It's not asking you what would it do. So ideally what it would do, cut and optimize SLR, isn't it? So if there is no not, this would be the right answer. Increase the MSF rate, isn't it? So in fact I am just trying to assume there is no word called not. So in such case, increase MSF would not be an expansionary policy, it's a contractionary policy, isn't it? So cut the bank rate and repo rate, again this results in expansionary policy. So what do you think it would not do is this, isn't it? The money multiplier economy increases with which of the following? Money multiplier is nothing but a reserve ratio, isn't it? So higher is the reserve ratio, lesser will be money multiplier, lesser is the reserve ratio, higher will be money multiplier. So what do you think? The money multiplier economy increases with which one of the following? Increase in banking habits of people. Of course this is a question repeated, and that's the reason I have added one more, just to let you know the fact that the UPSC also keeps repeating questions. So the Reserve Bank of India, this is an explanation that I will provide in a video, and the description would be provided. So because it's going to be a lengthy topic that we are going to discuss about the payment system and all these things. Which of the following statements occur regarding Monetary Policy Committee? It decides RBI's benchmark interest rates, and we as of now we have a bi-monthly policy review. They constitute, they formulate the policy, and they reviews once in a while. Okay, bi-monthly policy. It's a 12-member body. No, in fact it's a 6-member body, and including governor of RBI, and it's reconstituted every year, not necessary. Okay, so this is wrong, and reconstitute every year is also. It functions under the chairman of Union Finance. No, Union Finance Minister has nothing to do with it. So there are 6 members in the committee. 3 members are within RBI, and 3 members happens to be outsiders. When it comes to outsiders, it happens to be the one the government chooses. Whom to be represented. So henceforth only the option 1 happens to be the most appropriate answer. European stability mechanism, sometimes we have seen in news, is an. So like we have, my friends, the RBI is responsible in stabilizing the prices of goods and services. Similarly, we have within European Union and within Eurozone, you have the European Central Bank taking the responsibility, something similar to what RBI does in this country. So European Stability Mechanism, sometimes seen in news, is an agency created by EU to deal with impact of millions of refugees arriving from East. No, nothing to do. Agents of EU that provides financial assistance to Eurozone countries. Let's keep this, and let's look at the rest, and then we will come across it. Agents of European Union to deal with all bilateral, multilateral agreements on trade. No, it has nothing to do with trade. Agency of European Union to deal with the conflicts arising among the member countries. No, in fact it is a monetary authority that helps in stabilizing the various prices of goods and services and provide financial assistance to the member countries. So in fact, my friends, whatever the job RBI does to India, it is what the European Central Bank does to the respective nations who have adopted euro as a currency. That's mean Eurozone nations. That's it. With reference to Indian economy, consider the following: bank rate, OMO, public debt, public revenue. Which of the following are components of monetary policy? You know this is the components of monetary policy, and then these two components happens to be fiscal policy, isn't it? So henceforth C right answer. With the Reserve Bank of India reduces SLR by 50 basis points, which of the following like to happen? So you know this SLR reduction or any reduction for that matter results in expansionary policy, isn't it? It is an indication of a expansionary policy. Does mean interest rates decreases and credit supply increases. When I say credit supply increases, mean offtake of loans increases. Don't you think so? When the banks are interested in lending you money at a cheaper rate, would you not be interested in borrowing? Same thing now. India's GDP growth rate increases drastically. You cannot guarantee this. Of course, it might help in generating more amount of goods and services, producing more goods and services, but you cannot guarantee. Foreign institutional investors may bring more capital into our country. Okay, even you cannot guarantee this. Scheduled commercial banks may cut their lending rates. Yes, there are high chances, because if they have been left with more amount of liquidity with them, because they don't need to maintain more of deposits in the form of SLR, so henceforth they would be left with more capital or more liquidity with them. That might help these bankers to cut their lending rates. It may drastically reduce the liquidity to the banking system. No, it might not. It doesn't reduce the liquidity, rather it increases the liquidity, because what is the central bank doing? Reducing the SLR by 50 basis points. And I guess you know a basis point is 1% of 1%. Generally, rather than simply expressing the interest rates in percentage terms, people express them in terms of a basis point, just to magnify the impact of change in policy rate. Okay, so you know 1%, 1%, one part out of 100 parts, and you divide that one part out, which is a part of 100 parts. I mean 1%, isn't it? So one part out of 100, and you divide it again into 100 points. That's what we call as a basis point. Each point which is part of 1 out of this 1%. So henceforth, that's the reason I call basis point is nothing but 1% of 1%. In the context of Indian economy, which of the following are the purpose of SLR requirements? What's the basic purpose? That's the question asked. SLR. You know, SLR refers to the percentage of net demand and time liabilities the bank has to maintain certain liquid form, mostly in the form of gold, forex, government approved securities, isn't it? So its purpose क्या है? That's what the question has been asked. Securities, isn't it? So purpose क्या है? Let's look at it. To enable central bank to control the amount of advances the banks can create? No. Of course, by altering SLR, you could control the supply of money, or you could control the lend, the amount of money banks lend, but its intention is not this. To make people's deposits with the banks safe and liquid, to an extent, banks keeping most of their reserves in this form would help in better returns to the bank. So maybe you could also ensure, maybe this makes sense. To prevent commercial banks from making excessive profits. Why is it so? Why would the government or the RBI would be interested in ensuring their own banks suffer by making less and less profits? No, I don't think this is a proper answer. To force banks to have sufficient wall cash to meet their day-to-day requirements? No, ideally it is the CRR that serves this purpose, isn't it? So now the question is, in the context of Indian economy, which of the following is or the purpose of a statutory requirements? It's to make the people's deposits with banks safe and liquid. Okay, so 2 happens to be to enable central banks to control the amount of advance the banks can create. So since if there's been only 2, then it would have been, but to enable central bank to control the amount of advances the banks can create. So the thing is that SLR could also be used to enable the banks to control the loans they could extend. Henceforth, you could also consider the first and second, isn't it? So the only objective is not this, isn't it? But the very basic intention of SLR is to ensure certain proportion of deposits is with safe and liquid, but at the same time, since SLR could also be used to alter the supply of money by limiting the amount of money banks could lend or what they could extend as an advances to the market in the form of loans, and henceforth 1 and 2 could be the better answers. If the interest rate is decreased in the economy, what happens? Interest rates decreases, what happens? Demand decreases. Why so? Because consumption decreases. Why do consumption decreases? Because offtake of credit decreases, isn't it? So interest rates is decreased in an economy. Interest rates decreased does mean people would like to borrow more. Credit supply increases. When supply increases, the demand increases. I'm sorry for this. So what happens? If the interest rate is decreased in the economy, it will decrease the consumption expenditure. No, rather it increases. Increase the tax collection of the government, you cannot guarantee. Increase the investment expenditure, yes, definitely this makes sense, because when the interest is so low, people will be willing to borrow and invest. And increase in total savings in the economy, you cannot guarantee, isn't it? When the interests are cheaper and people are borrowing spend, how come people would be interested in savings rather, isn't it? Because when money is cheaper, people rather than saving, they prefer spending. So henceforth, this might be the best option. So we'll continue with the second part. Thank you.